Imagine a quiet person in a crowded room. They notice everything: a tightening jaw, a swallowed sigh, a small lie glinting like a shard. For years, they take it all in. They fix things. They soothe. They apologize on behalf of others. They carry what nobody else will carry. One evening, the same quiet person stands up and simply says, "No more. No shouting. No grand scene. Just a clean refusal." And the room changes. The lies unravel. The small tyrannies that thrived on silence begin to wobble. People who banked on this person's invisible labor suddenly have to stand on their own legs. Carl Jung watched transformations like this. He noticed that those who feel too much can, when pushed to their limit, become unshakable, not savage, not vengeful, unbreakable. The empathy that once made them easy to exploit becomes paradoxically their strongest defense. It becomes a kind of precision, a capacity to read motives, to see patterns, to refuse participation in games that thrive on unconsciousness. Today, we'll walk through Jung's most powerful ideas about this change. We'll map the steps from wounded giver to sovereign healer. We'll see why narcissists fear it, not because the empath turns cruel, but because they stop being useful. They withdraw their participation. That withdrawal is a force. It dissolves systems built on other people's emotional labor. If you've ever been told you're too sensitive, stay with this. There's a different story underneath that label. There's a gift, and when that gift is claimed, it reshapes the world around you. Carl Jung described certain patterns that repeat across lifetimes and cultures. He used words like archetype and shadow to name parts of the psyche we all carry. One archetype he wrote about is the wounded healer, someone whose wounds become the root of their wisdom. That's the empath's origin story in Jungian terms. But a crucial point Jung emphasized: wounds alone don't heal you. Awareness does. A person can be a wounded healer only if they engage their wound consciously, if they learn from it, instead of being defined by it. For many empaths, the pattern looks like this. They feel deeply. They try to help. The world takes rather than gives back, and the empath's care becomes an unpaid labor. Jung's deeper observation, and here is where the text flips, is that under certain pressures, the wounded healer inverts. The giver does not simply keep giving. The giver becomes a chooser. This is enantiodromia, the swing that turns an extreme into its opposite. Imagine a dam finally finding a controlled outlet. The pressure doesn't vanish, it transforms. The transformation Jung tracked is not moralizing. It isn't be mean to be safe. It's the integration of what he called the shadow, the parts we were taught to shame: anger, selfishness, refusal. Integration means the empath learns to feel those parts without acting destructively on them. They gain access to a full range of responses: compassion with boundaries, fierce protection without cruelty. Why does that matter? Because power dynamics in relationships often depend on one person remaining predictable. If you are reliably agreeable, manipulators can script you. Jung noticed that when empaths become unpredictable, when they meet manipulation with clear boundaries instead of absorption, the whole script breaks. The manipulator loses the cues they depend on. This is a psychological shift at the level of perception. Empaths learn to see motives where before there were only emotions. They don't stop feeling. They start choosing. And the choice itself is a new kind of strength: quiet, decisive, and terrifying to those who relied on their compliance. Modern neuroscience has found correlates that help explain Jung's clinical observations. Studies point to heightened mirror neuron activity and amplified processing in emotion-related brain regions for highly empathic people. Practically, that means empaths mirror feelings quickly. They tune to moods and micro cues that others miss. That wiring explains vulnerability. If you register every shift in tone as your problem, you'll be exhausted. You become a living emotional sponge. But here's the important piece Jung hinted at, and science now supports. The same sensitivity, when managed consciously, gives you extraordinary perception. Imagine two tools: a microphone without a mute, and the same microphone with a skilled operator. The tool is neutral. What changes things is the operator's competence. Jung's point is similar. Empathy is a perceptual instrument. Without boundaries, it picks up everything and burns out. With boundaries, it becomes clairvoyant, not mystical, but practical. You anticipate manipulation because you can feel the discrepancy between what someone is saying and what they are unconsciously broadcasting. This is where shadow integration plays in again. The empath learns to recognize which feelings belong to them and which do not. That's not easy. It requires practice and a steady interior witness. Jung called the development of that witness part of individuation, the process of becoming a whole person. As you individuate, your empathic antennae become diagnostic tools. You detect projection, you see patterns of blame, and you predict behavioral cycles. For the manipulator, this is dangerous. Manipulation relies on stealth, on being able to influence without detection. When the empath learns to perceive motive before behavior, the manipulator's advantage collapses. The empath's sensitivity becomes forecast, not fallout. and forecasting gives choice, a chance to refuse to engage in the drama. Jung's clinical notes reveal a recurring architecture when empaths change. We can break it down into 3 stages: recognition, integration, and sovereignty. Each stage is distinct, and each requires a specific kind of work. Recognition is the moment the pattern becomes visible. The empath stops mystifying the behavior of others and names it: projection, gaslighting, emotional blackmail. This is the lifting of the veil. Naming is not blaming, it's seeing. Once you can say, "This is manipulation," you stop internalizing the shame and confusion. Integration is the heavy, personal work. This is where you reclaim denied emotions: anger, self-interest, the right to say no. Jung taught that the shadow is not evil. It's unlived life. For an empath, integration may include practicing small refusals, allowing anger to exist without acting like a victim, or saying, "I won't do that," without over-explaining. Integration isn't theatrical. It's consistent, incremental re-education of your responses. Sovereignty is the outcome. It's not a trophy. It's a field change. You stop looking to others for permission to exist. You own your interior. That ownership is experienced as calm clarity. You feel compassion undistorted by self-erasure. You can empathize without being depleted. Why is this sequence so effective against manipulative systems? Because those systems exploit unconscious cooperation. They need you to believe the script. "I am responsible for your mood," or "if I leave, they'll fall apart." When you refuse the script at the recognition stage and keep refusing through integration, the ecosystem that fed on your labor must adapt or collapse. That refusal creates space for healthier interactions, or for the manipulator to search for another unwitting participant. Automatic empathy is the reflexive mode. It's the part of you that rushes to soothe without thinking. Conscious empathy is different. It's chosen. You decide when to engage, how to engage, and how much to give. Think of it like a faucet. Automatic empathy is the faucet left on. Conscious empathy is a faucet you control. You open it to help. You close it to preserve yourself. That simple control transforms how you relate to others. Short example. Maria used to stay late every night, calming a boss's bad mood. She began to say, "I'll address this tomorrow," and left. The boss had to manage the mood without her evening labor, and did eventually in healthier ways. Becoming intentional about empathy teaches you the difference between being useful and being used. The clarity you gain is both a shield and a map. It helps you spot patterns. It also helps you allocate your energy where it matters most, toward people who can reciprocate. That change is practical freedom. It's not dramatic. It's daily, small sovereignty. Jung suggested that psychic energy is finite. He called attention to psychological economy, managing internal resources. For empaths, this is crucial. You must budget attention, feelings, and emotional labor, because those resources fuel your life. Tools you can use: audits, micro-refusals, and emotional labeling. An audit is simple. List who and what drains you and why. Micro-refusals are tiny practices of saying no without drama. Emotional labeling is pausing to say, "That feeling is theirs, not mine," to prevent absorption. Short example. Tom did weekly energy audits. He noticed a friend whose conversations always left him shaky. He limited calls to 20 minutes and redirected the friend to professional help. Tom's health improved, physically and emotionally. These are not manipulative tricks. They are stewardship. Jung would call it attending to your ego functions, strengthening the conscious center that can hold boundaries. When you protect your energy, you increase clarity and reduce reactivity. That clarity helps you decide where empathy will be regenerative rather than draining. Once integrated, an empath develops what I'll call a truth detector. This isn't supernatural. It's pattern recognition, powered by emotional intelligence. You detect mismatch between tone and content, between a person's story and their nonverbal script. That detection disrupts manipulation. Narcissists are performative. Their power depends on audiences who will fill in the gaps and absorb the cost. The empath who sees through the performance refuses the stage. Short example. Sarah's coworker always took credit, then smiled as if nothing happened. When Sarah began documenting contributions in shared files and asking for public acknowledgments, the pattern of theft stopped. She removed the invisibility that fed the predator. Perception is often the first intervention. Before arguments, before confrontation, simply noticing and naming the behavior changes the dynamic. It removes the fog where manipulation thrives. Let me tell you a longer, quiet story, because these transformations are lived in stories. Michael grew up in a household where feelings were a currency. His mother learned to spend guilt and monopoly of misery to control every decision. Michael, sensitive and dutiful, became the family's regulator, the person who smoothed storms and kept the peace. He absorbed blame. He smoothed his own needs into small creases. Years later, after therapy and reading Jung, Michael had a realization. He had been doing emotional labor that allowed his mother to avoid her interior. He began a practice of small refusals. At first, he said no to phone calls that were 12 minutes of crisis with no resolution. Then, he stopped apologizing reflexively. He set an appointment calendar for visits, not open-ended availability. The first months were painful. His mother escalated. She accused him of cruelty. She used everything she knew: threats, victimhood, historical guilt. For a time, the family system trembled. But here's the essential point. When Michael held his boundaries consistently, others had to adjust. Some did. Some found new ways to meet their needs. A cousin who always crashed at Michael's place had to make an alternate plan. A sibling who had long relied on Michael to deflect family anger grew angry, then, slowly, learned to name their feelings without outsourcing them. Michael didn't become cold. He learned to sit in his compassion without solving. When his mother descended into drama, Michael offered scheduled support 2 hours per week and refused to be the 24/7 emotional garbage chute. Over years, the patterns shifted. Not perfect, not neat. But Michael's withdrawal from unconscious participation forced the system to either mature or fragment. Both outcomes were better than the quiet rot of everyone pretending nothing was wrong. This is the fed-up empath's power. It's not about punishment. It's about making unconscious arrangements visible. When you stop facilitating dysfunction, you make room for repair or honest separation. Either way, you are no longer the fuel for a machine that is built to avoid its own repair. Consider Lisa's story. A different setting, same pattern, similar result. Lisa worked in a small team where one charismatic colleague dominated meetings. He took ideas, redirected praise, and used passive-aggressive comments to keep others uncertain. For years, Lisa compensated. She would reframe his comments, take extra tasks, and privately reassure teammates who felt criticized. Her caretaking hid the bully's pattern because she continually absorbed the friction. After a period of burnout, Lisa read Jung, and she started practicing clarity. She documented work contributions in shared documents. In meetings, she asked direct questions and redirected credit to named contributors. When the bully tried to gaslight her by implying she'd forgotten her own contributions, she calmly produced timestamps and email chains. She refused the emotional labor of smoothing his performance. The immediate effect: the bully tried escalation. He lied. He complained to HR. He tried to make her the problem. But because Lisa had factual documentation and calm boundaries, the company began to notice a dissonance in his pattern. Colleagues, relieved to no longer have to second-guess their own contributions, began to speak up. Without Lisa's smoothing, his mask slipped in front of others. Within a year, the team's culture changed. Credit became explicit, timelines were recorded, and passive aggression lost purchase. The bully moved on to a company where his behaviors were still rewarded. For Lisa, the reward was quieter. She reclaimed her sense of agency, recovered energy, and helped create an environment where performance, not charm, earned recognition. This story shows a larger dynamic. Fed-up empaths don't just defend themselves, they change the ecosystem. When you stop being the invisible labor that props up a manipulative actor, others either adapt toward healthier participation, or the system reveals itself and reshuffles. That reshuffling is often messy. It can be painful for everyone, but it's the necessary clearing that precedes more honest social arrangements. Carl Jung's observations give us a practical map. He shows that the empath's path is not from weakness to cruelty. It's from unconscious giving to conscious sovereignty. The change requires care, discipline, and humility. It requires seeing how we've been co-conspirators in patterns that once kept us safe in childhood, but now cost us our lives. If you're listening and you feel the weight of other people's feelings, good. That sensitivity is important, but it's also negotiable. Empathy doesn't mean erasing yourself. It means choosing where your care goes. It means practicing small acts of refusal, auditing your energy, and learning to recognize projection when it arrives. 3 practical takeaways to begin today. 1. Start an energy audit. For 1 week, note interactions that leave you depleted. Name them. That awareness alone changes behavior. 2. Practice micro-refusals. Say, "I can't," or "not now," without elaborate apology. Small boundary habits compound. 3. Document facts. In workplaces or with chronic manipulators, keep simple records. Clarity defeats charm. Remember, the fed-up empath's power is not dramatic. It's steady. It's the power to stop being used. It's the quieter strength of choosing how to participate. This refusal reshapes relationships, sometimes gently, sometimes turbulently, but always toward more honest arrangements. If you've been told you're too sensitive, hear this. Sensitivity is not a defect. It's a diagnostic tool. With practice, it becomes protection. With awareness, it becomes wisdom. With boundaries, it becomes freedom. If this resonated, leave a comment. I am sovereign in my empathy. Share this with someone who still thinks being sensitive is a weakness. And if you want more, watch the deeper dive I made about energy vampirism and Jung's methods for shadow work. Thank you for listening. Take care of your energy. Be wise with your heart.